think you've met controlling people, wait until you hear what these ones did. Don't sit. I laughed, thinking it was a joke. I'm serious, my manager said, watching me hover over the chair like it offended him. It lowers your authority. But I've been standing for 8 hours. He leaned closer, smiling. That's exactly the point. That's when I realized this wasn't a job. It was a loyalty test. I once worked at a startup where the founder banned the word problem. He said it attracted negative energy and lowered investor confidence. Instead, we had to call everything an unexpected opportunity. One day the server crashed, and I told him, we have a major problem. He froze. Say it correctly. I sighed. We have an unexpected opportunity that erased all customer data. He nodded proudly, like we were evolving. Later that week, a client called screaming about lost files. I put him on speaker and explained the situation. Your data is gone. The founder burst into the room, waving his hands. Language, he whispered aggressively. I corrected myself mid-call. Your data has transitioned into a growth opportunity. There was a long pause. Then the client said, "Are you mocking me?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. The worst part wasn't the rule itself. It was how everyone adapted. People started correcting each other automatically. Not a delay, it's a timing expansion. Not a mistake, it's a learning event. After a while, it stopped being funny. It felt like we were slowly losing the ability to describe reality. And once that happens, you stop fixing things. You just rename them until everything sounds acceptable. That's the pattern I started noticing. Control doesn't always look aggressive. Sometimes it hides behind positivity, growth, or the standards. But the effect is the same, reality gets rewritten to protect one person's ego. And once everyone plays along, the system becomes self-sustaining. No one questions it anymore. Not because they agree, but because it's easier than being the one person who doesn't. I rented a room once where the landlord insisted on greeting rituals. Every time you entered the apartment, you had to stop in the hallway, face the living room, and say, "Good evening, home." The first time, I laughed. He didn't. It maintains harmony, he said. One night I came in late and forgot. He appeared silently behind me and whispered, "You skipped the acknowledgement." I didn't sleep much after that. The next morning, he handed me a printed sheet titled Respect Protocol. It listed phrases we were required to say in specific situations. Entering the kitchen, "Thank you for providing nourishment." Leaving the bathroom, "I appreciate the space." I asked if this was optional. He looked genuinely confused. Why would respect be optional? From that moment, every action in the apartment felt like a performance. What made it worse was how calm he always sounded. No yelling, no threats. Just quiet disappointment if you got it wrong. One evening, I forgot to say the kitchen line. He didn't react immediately. Instead, he waited until dinner and said, "I feel the energy has been disrupted today." Everyone looked at me. No one said anything. But I knew exactly what I had done. That kind of control is more effective than shouting. It makes you police yourself. There's no obvious conflict, just constant pressure to behave correctly. And because the rules sound reasonable, you start questioning your own resistance. Maybe it's not that bad. Maybe I'm overreacting. That's how it works. Not through force, but through subtle normalization of things that shouldn't be normal at all. I dated someone who believed conversations had levels, and you had to earn access to higher ones. Level 1 was small talk. Level 2 was personal thoughts. Level 3 was emotional vulnerability. Sounds fine, right? Except she decided which level we were on at any given moment. One night I started telling a story about my childhood, and she raised her hand. "You haven't unlocked that level today." I laughed, thinking it was sarcasm. She didn't laugh back. We're currently at level 1, she said. You can talk about weather, food, or general observations. I stared at her. We've been dating for 6 months. She nodded. Levels reset daily. Emotional access must be re-earned. I remember sitting there, holding a memory I suddenly wasn't allowed to share, feeling like I needed permission to exist. The strangest part was how consistent she was. If I tried to skip levels, she would withdraw completely. No response, no eye contact. Just silence until I adjusted. Eventually, I stopped trying. Conversations became safe, predictable, empty. And one day, I realized I didn't know anything new about her anymore. Not because she wasn't talking, but because I wasn't allowed to ask the right questions. Some people don't control your actions. They control access. To emotions, to information, to connection. And that's even more powerful. Because now you're not just following rules, you're trying to earn something. Approval, intimacy, validation. And once control is tied to reward, it becomes addictive. You don't resist it. You chase it. Even when you know something feels completely off. I once stayed at a small hotel where the night manager watched everything through a wall of screens behind the desk. At first, it felt like security. Then I noticed something strange. He wasn't watching the entrances. He was watching people. Zooming in, rewinding, replaying moments of guests walking through hallways. One night, I caught him smiling at a paused frame of someone just standing still. I asked casually, "What are you looking for?" He didn't look away from the screen. "Patterns," he said. "What kind of patterns?" He zoomed into a guest adjusting their jacket. "Inconsistencies." I laughed nervously. "Like what?" He finally turned to me. People don't realize how much they reveal when they think no one is watching. I didn't ask anything else after that. That night, I went back to my room and felt observed. Not in a dramatic way. Just a quiet awareness that somewhere, someone could rewind my smallest movements and assign meaning to them. The next morning, I checked out early. As I handed in my key, he smiled and said, "You sleep very still." I hadn't told him anything about my night. At this point I thought I've seen everything. I was wrong. That's another version of control. Not rules, not authority, just observation. When people know they're being watched, they adjust automatically. They don't need instructions. They self-correct. And sometimes, the scariest part isn't what someone does with that power. It's the fact that they enjoy having it. Quietly. Patiently. Without ever needing to explain why. I worked at a company where the CEO introduced something called energy alignment breaks. Every 2 hours, a bell would ring, and everyone had to stop working, stand up, and face the same direction. "North," he said, pointing at a compass app on his phone. That's where clarity comes from. We stood there in silence for exactly 60 seconds, staring at a wall like confused statues. One time, a new employee didn't stand up when the bell rang. He kept typing, probably thinking it wasn't serious. The CEO walked over slowly and placed his hand on the desk. "You're resisting alignment," he said quietly. The guy looked up, confused. "I'm finishing an email." The CEO shook his head. That's exactly how misalignment begins. He was asked to reflect it in a separate room. After that, no one questioned it. Even when clients were on calls, we'd suddenly go silent, stand up, and face north. One client actually asked, "Are you guys okay?" I muted the mic and stared at the wall, counting seconds, wondering how this had become normal. Not the rule itself, but how quickly everyone accepted it without asking why. Absurd systems don't survive because they make sense. They survive because no one wants to be the first person to challenge them. The cost of questioning feels higher than the cost of complying. So people adapt. They joke about it privately, follow it publicly, and slowly, the line between this is ridiculous and this is just how things are completely disappears. I had a boss who believed that loyalty should be visible. Every Friday, he would call one person into his office and ask them to prove their commitment to the company. At first, it was small things. Staying late, taking extra tasks. Then it escalated. One coworker was asked to cancel a weekend trip. Another had to skip a family event. It didn't stop there. One day, it was my turn. I walked in, already uneasy. He smiled and said, "I need to know where your priorities are." I nodded, waiting. He slid a paper across the table. It was a resignation letter, already filled out. "Sign this," he said, "and show me you're willing to leave everything behind for this company." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. I stared at the paper, trying to process what I was being asked to do. "If I sign this, I quit." He nodded. "Exactly. That's commitment. Trust that I'll take care of you." My hands didn't move. After a long silence, he leaned back and sighed. "I see. You're not ready." I walked out without signing. The next week, my responsibilities were quietly reduced. That's the extreme version of control, when someone tries to replace your identity with theirs. Your time, your priorities, your decisions, all redirected toward one center. And the scary part is, some people say yes. Not because they're weak, but because the system slowly trains them to believe that sacrifice equals value. And once you accept that, there's no clear way back. I once had a coworker who believed silence was a form of disrespect. If you didn't respond to him within 3 seconds in a conversation, he would snap his fingers once, sharply, like resetting your attention. The first time he did it to me, I froze. "Stay present," he said calmly. After that, every pause felt dangerous, like even thinking for too long was considered disobedience. One meeting, I paused to consider a question. Just a second. Maybe 2. Snap. The sound cut through the room. Everyone heard it. I looked up, embarrassed. "Answer when addressed," he said, still calm, like he was teaching something obvious. No one reacted. That was the worst part. Not the snapping, but how normal it felt to everyone else sitting there. Eventually, I started answering faster. Not better. Just faster. Conversations became shallow, reactive. No depth, no reflection. Just immediate responses to avoid that sharp sound. And one day, I realized I wasn't thinking anymore during meetings. I was performing. Trying to stay just quick enough to avoid correction, but not slow enough to draw attention. That's when I knew something had shifted. This last one. I still don't have an explanation. Speed control is subtle, but powerful. If someone dictates how fast you're allowed to think, they shape what you're able to say. Reflection disappears. Depth disappears. And over time, you don't just lose your voice, you lose the space where your thoughts used to form. That's how control evolves. Not by silencing you, but by removing the time you need to speak honestly. I rented an apartment where the owner insisted on doing monthly environment checks. He said it was to ensure the space remained energetically stable. The first time, he walked in slowly, not looking at me, just scanning the room. "Something feels off," he murmured. I asked what he meant. He pointed at a chair I had moved slightly closer to the window. "Why is this here?" he asked. "I wanted more light," I said. He nodded slowly, like that confirmed something. Light changes behavior. I laughed awkwardly. "It's just a chair." He stepped closer. "Nothing is just anything." That sentence stayed with me longer than it should have. Not because it made sense, but because of how certain he sounded when he said it. After that, things got stranger. He started noticing small changes. A book moved. A different mug. A lamp turned at a new angle. Every time, he would mention it casually, like tracking a pattern I couldn't see. One evening, he said, "You've been restless lately." I hadn't told him anything about my life. But suddenly, I felt like my space wasn't mine anymore. The final visit was the worst. He stood in the middle of the room, completely still, then said, "You're thinking about leaving." I felt a chill run through me. "I mentioned that once," I said. He shook his head. "No." The room told me. I didn't argue. I just nodded, waited for him to leave, and started packing that same night without touching anything else. That's the thing about control. It doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it builds quietly, through rules, expectations, patterns, until one day you realize you've adjusted so much, you don't recognize your own behavior anymore. And the scariest part isn't the people who control everything. It's how easily we adapt to it, just to avoid being the one who doesn't.